would you like to take roll?
I would. Thank you all for joining us at the April 5th, 2017 Hanover Downtown Development Authority meeting. Sada Lekaj-Farah, Bob Gunzel,
Here.
Marie Klopp, here, Howard Lazarus,
Here.
Jill Moenstein, Gary McKinnon,
Present.
Al McWilliams, John Moad,
Here.
Rishi Narayan,
Here.
Keith Orr,
Here.
John Split,
Here.
Bill Weiss.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Great. First up, audience participation. Jeannie Reynolds. Is she here? No? Okay, moving forward. Ed Vilmetti. 1 second, Ed. Sorry. Okay.
Hi, my name is Ed Vilmetti. I work downtown at Mercantile, which is about a block west of here. I normally take the bus to town, and occasionally I drive, and occasionally I park on the street. It got me to thinking about what sort of information would be useful both for people who park as well as for people who are doing planning about parking, about the data that's gathered by the e-park meters. We have pretty good data about parking structure information. There's a website that publishes up-to-date parking data for the occupancy of every structure in something approaching real time. That's been working for a long time. If anyone were to want to gather minute-by-minute data, they could. I'm not aware of anyone who's actually doing that, but that's certainly not an issue. What is of interest is the e-park data. The e-park machines print out a little receipt which has time, date, meter number, the meter that the e-park machine that you paid at, or whether you paid online. This big treasure trove of data. And I was thinking about that data set, right? So like every time anyone ever parked in Ann Arbor, not personal information, not who you are, not the color of your car, not whether you got a ticket, but just where did you park, for how long, how much did you pay? And thinking about that big data set and adding that up along a bunch of different dimensions. One adding up is to say, for each day of the year, how much did people pay for parking, right? Very simple graph which should have some interesting peaks and valleys and notches in it. Divided up by neighborhood, divided up by whatever geography you have, but like every meter has a space number and you can add those things up. The other interesting number that if you were going to add it in the other direction would be how much revenue came from each space over the course of a year. I don't care about a day. I care about some long-term measurable quantity that you could track year on year, maybe not day on day. And finally, once you had all that data sort of crunched down to that one column in your Excel spreadsheet or in your big data platform, then the question is, how do you visualize that? And the obvious thing to do is the map that says, for each space, total revenue for the year, color code, high, medium, low. I don't think that's beyond the capacity of the DDA to provide that data. I would leave it to the creativity or the contract work from someone to actually do the work in terms of that. But from an access to operations data standpoint, that highly aggregated, no personal information, information about what's going on in the whole downtown, I think would be really valuable both for planning purposes and for citizen purposes, because if I knew up front that there were parking areas that were typically underused, then I would go there first, right? And I think that from the long-term demand management standpoint, letting people visualize, here's the downtown meter parking situation. You've got e-park meters in a lot of places and more coming. I think that'd be super valuable. So probably not a tomorrow answer for that, but that'd be nice to do within the next year. Thanks very much.
Cool, thanks, Ed. Okay, next up we have reports from city boards and commissions. Ray Detter, you are up, sir.
Last night's Downtown Area Citizens Advisory Council meeting was devoted to really fine-tuning of our long-held positions on the future of the library block. We reaffirmed last night that we did not want a development to be constructed on the block until the community completes a full public discussion of the possibilities to connect that block to related concerns in the area. And you've heard me say that before. We've always supported the positive possibility that a residential mixed-use development would be located on the site that the building would need parking. We supported construction of the underground parking structure on the library block, and we believed it should be larger. The City Council believed it should be smaller. We also supported a 12,000 square foot plaza as a requirement for any project. We have insisted that details of how the plaza is to function as a cooperative public-private open space needed to be clearly identified and agreed upon. Last night we stressed the importance of more public activity on the street level, perhaps even more retail. We have also wanted whatever goes in the library block to consider the possibility of connecting to and improving Liberty Plaza, cooperating with First Martin on whatever they hope to develop on their properties. We reject, however, we've consistently done that, the goal of turning the top of the parking structure into a park. We still believe that plans should include a possible connection to the Blake Transit Center and the former YMCA site, even eventually connecting to emerging plans for the development of the nearby Allen Creek Greenway. Plans should limit negative impact on nearby historical and residential properties and clearly benefit continued operation of the district library on the block. Looking at over the core memorandum on purchase contract deal points which they recently produced showing how they had conformed to lots of expectations, what we found was that they have significantly considered city expectations in regard to connectivity, design, plaza use, and programming requirements, sustainability, lead goal, workforce housing, and parking, all subject, of course, to City Council approval. But last night, everyone seemed to agree that more hard negotiations were needed before we move forward in the public process of first a citizens' participation meeting, at least 2 design review board meetings, multiple planning commission meetings, and final City Council approval. More discussion is needed before we proceed to sell the property. It will probably take at least 3 years for this development to be completed. Last night, Susan Paulet filled us in on possible future DDA considerations on the downtown parking issue. CAC is impressed with DDA plans for the special retreat in June to work out future details of the DDA parking transportation supply plan as a part of a larger plan for the future with regard to parking in the downtown. And we hope that they will provide a clear path to handling our future downtown parking problems. We all agree that the biggest and most expensive mixed-use building on the site is not our goal. It shouldn't be the city's goal. Yes, that property is zone D1, 180 feet. But CORE has indicated at various times that they will build what the City Council wants. It's all up to all of us to lead them in the right direction, define what that direction happens to be. If the product happens to be smaller, but better, that's the way we might want to go. Recognizing, of course, that CORE might want to pay less. Thank you.
Thank you, Ray. Excuse me. Are there any communications from DDA members? Nope. All right. Executive Director Communications, Susan.
So I have a couple for you. The first is at your seat. You see a flyer for our South University project. We are holding an informational meeting with businesses and others in and near the Southwood area on April 13th. What we're conveying in the flyer, and we're going to share with them our plans for construction. We're going to begin work right after commencement. The project construction will begin at the western end on the north side and will work its way around through the neighborhood. We will be running our traffic westbound throughout the project, but eastbound traffic will be detoured during the time of that work. At all points, access into the businesses will be maintained, generally through mats and other things, so wheelchair access and so forth will be maintained. The project will continue straight through to Art Fair. We'll close up, clean things up for Art Fair, get right back to work. The goal is to get it done before move-in back at the end of the summer. And our goal is to keep the neighborhood informed throughout. We're giving a lot of contact information and want to remain visible throughout because there will be questions that come up, not just at this meeting, but otherwise. The other thing to report on is that I had the opportunity last week to attend an International Downtown Association College Summit. It's a college town summit. Downtowns that have universities in their midst. So I had a chance to meet with people from Santa Cruz and Fort Collins, Berkeley, Tempe, and so forth. And what was valuable about it was to reaffirm that we're all on the same topic conversations. For instance, what we're talking about here are things like parking for the nighttime economy and how to support that economy, how to work around the amazing amount of redevelopment we're seeing, where parking lots are now being redeveloped as mixed-use buildings, which puts pressure on the system not only because of the removal of parking, but now added parking demand. And that all of us are all working to find ways to keep our communities engaged, and the goal is also to keep our communities diverse. I learned some ideas that some are exploring, and I'll be interested to hear more about it. For instance, some communities like Tempe have parking assigned near the bars, so at 2 o'clock they want people to park their cars so that Uber and Lyft give you a ride home. They have problems in their community with drunk driving. And I think that's an interesting question. Or they're working with an idea of geofencing. If Uber and Lyft are creating issues, work to create areas where they can and cannot pick up. I thought that was interesting. One of the other ideas for our administrator in Tempe, Arizona State University has a university person housed at City Hall, and they work constantly with the city, particularly on economic development strategies. So it's not as we have it, where we're collegial and supportive. They're actually there specifically to try to pursue economic development opportunities. With all the sessions that I attended, one that had particular weight for me, I left for you a handout that was given at that session, and it's my first bit of homework for you for that retreat. And it's looking at trends. Where are we going? And what I found valuable about the session and also about the handout is it helps to put things in a context that I think is useful. For instance, as we look to the future, I shared with at least a couple of you, we're focusing on millennials. Well, this is looking ahead to the generation after that, the Gen Zs, that they have a different set of values by all indications that look different than millennials. And so it's not just going to stop at millennials and that's the end of it. That, for instance, the Gen Zs appear to be more materialistic and they tend to be more conservative financially than the millennials are. This is also a group, interestingly, that is likely to want to go to college less because they're seeing their older siblings take on college debt, sometimes 6 figures and more, and they're growing up in an era of entrepreneurship. So the question will be asked, why do I need to take out that debt if I'm going to create my own company? And I thought that was an interesting question that has implications for college towns like ours. If the university may see a softening in demand, what would that look like for our community? I think it's interesting, too, that the global trends have investment finding their way into our downtowns, so we're not going to see likely much abatement in demand. One of the stats was in 2016 that a walkable urban place, multifamily residential commands a rent premium of 66% more, retail is 71% more, and office at 90% increased premium. So that is pointing to a future where we're likely to see more cranes in the air, certainly more investment pressures. And it's also been a decade of per capita vehicle driving less, although 2015, as gas prices started to decline, it started to do an uptick. But overall, they're still predicting that we're likely not going to see as many car miles driven because they're still seeing millennials, Gen Zs, whatever we're working with, fewer driver's licenses. Something like 25, 26% just don't have them, much less are driving less. So these are trends that I think will be useful to us to think about as we begin to shape that retreat. The investment in parking needs to be considered, but how it fits within a larger set of trends I think is something that'll be helpful to think about. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Susan. Can I have a motion for the approval of the March meeting minutes?
So moved.
John? Marie, second. John moved. Any questions or concerns with the minutes from the March meeting? No? Alec?
I am going to recuse myself from voting because I wasn't there.
That's fair. All those in approval, all those in favor of approving the March meeting minutes, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? All right, motion passes. I almost screwed that up, but I did not. Next up is subcommittee reports. Operations Committee, John and Keith, take it away.
All right, we are going to start off today with a presentation on our parking operator RFP process by Jada to explain the steps that were taken and clarify the process for everyone.
It's like in school when the teacher surprised you because you got to watch a movie that day. It's pretty exciting. Fun.
So we'll take a moment and just kind of review how we got to where we are today. So last year, the DDA hired Walker Parking to perform an operational assessment of the parking system and to be with us as we crafted the RFP and the sample contract and went through the process. The RFP was distributed in January. 5 companies expressed initial interest and attended a tour here in Ann Arbor. 4 companies submitted responses. We narrowed that down to 2, Republic Parking and SP Plus, who were interviewed in March. At our last Operations Committee meeting, we reviewed the information and developed a recommendation that we're bringing to you today. So what I've done is pull information from the RFP responses and the interviews and compared them, set them up side by side so you can compare and contrast the 2 firms. The first set of slides is organized to reflect the format of the RFP and what we were asking for. In this first section, we asked for a description of organizational size and structure and examples of the type of systems that the firms had operated in. While they do differ in size, they are similar in that they've had comparable experience with a wide variety of parking systems, and their proposed management teams for Ann Arbor have a similar level of experience. In the RFP, we established a minimum threshold so that we would get responses from firms that we felt would be qualified. We required that respondents had operated a municipal system of 5,000 spaces for 3 years and an on-street parking enforcement system of 1,000 spaces for 3 years. As part of the process, Joe and I spoke with references for these 2 firms. Based on our discussions, we weren't able to tease out any big differences. All of the people that we spoke with were very happy with their current operator. In the RFP, we asked the companies to talk a little bit about some of the unique services that they provided, and here's a sample of what they mentioned. Republic focused on their focus on municipal systems and the involvement of senior level management. SP Plus focused on their green initiatives and a recent accreditation that they received as part of a new program through the International Parking Institute. In the RFP, we asked companies to provide a description of how they would effectively manage our system. So I've kind of, again, set them up so you can compare and contrast. Both companies have online and on-site training programs for both hourly and management staff. Both companies have a work order tracking system that is available internally and also to the client. Both companies utilize a command center structure. Republic Parking has worked to establish one here locally in Ann Arbor, and SP Plus has one central command center in Texas. Both firms have mystery shopper services available. Both have experience with online reservation systems, and both have rigorous auditing procedures in place. Here's some of the more technical aspects of the operation plans that we felt were comparable. And our work with Walker Parking was helpful here because we had a really good sense going into this of what is industry best practice. So we were able to, measure what they were reporting to us and understand that. So we've seen that there are lots of ways that the companies are comparable. One notable difference is the credit card fees. Republic Parking uses a percentage rate, while SB Plus has fixed fees in place. So we use the data from the January credit card numbers to illustrate what the large difference would be between the two fee structures. As a staff member who will be working with the parking operator on a daily basis, accuracy and attention to detail is very important to me. And here I think we had another difference between the two firms. Staff felt that Republic Parking did the best job at following all of the instructions and submitting a very complete and custom RFP response. After narrowing the firms down to the two that we wanted to interview, we asked them for some additional pieces of information. Republic Parking returned that information on time and in a very user-friendly format. The information from SB Plus was late getting back to us, and it was not formatted to be very usable at all. And as it falls to staff to receive information from the operator and process it and be ready to present it back to you, these kind of details are crucial to us. In the contract, in the RFP, we worked to include a sample contract so that the firms would, know what to expect when we got to that phase. Republic Parking did not have any exceptions to the contract. SB Plus listed 7 exceptions, so I'll just kind of go through them here briefly. The first one has to do with contract renewals. We wrote the contract so as to kind of keep the DDA in the driver's seat. SB Plus wanted any renewal terms to be mutually agreed to. They proposed higher deductibles, which were higher than what we had included in the RFP and the sample contract. They also let us know some technical differences about the way cancellation notices or changes to insurance would be communicated to us. On the top there, the DDA wanted the option and wrote the contract so that we would be able to terminate the parking agreement immediately if we wanted to. SB Plus mentioned here and requested a change to that section. They want to be able to be notified and have time to take corrective action. The same with the second one there. We wanted the ability to have to make monetary deductions from their base fee based on a set of infractions that were spelled out in the contract. SB Plus, as above, wanted time to investigate and cure those before we made deductions. The DDA also included in the contract that we wanted to review all insurance settlement claims that were paid. SB Plus said they would not be willing to do this, but that's an important aspect of us managing the system.
I have a question. So all of these provisions, are these new to the contract, or are these in our existing contract? Did you take this opportunity to say these are additional things that we want that are all new?
Some of them are new, most of them are existing, but they were in the sample contract that was included in the RFP. So both firms had a chance to read through and let us know if there were anything that they were going to want changed. And the last one had to do with a merchant of record and credit card sales, and we were able to resolve that. Another big difference is the proposed management fees. Republic proposed $125,000 base fee plus a possible $50,000 incentive fee for a possible total of $175,000. SB Plus's proposal was $200,000 a year with an annual growth rate of 3%. The incentive fee being $30,000 for a possible first-year total of $230,000.
Jada, what's an incentive fee?
In the contract, we have language that speaks to what we call a performance-based incentive fee. So they're going to get their management fee, but there's also another set of dollars that we, as a staff, make a recommendation to the operations committee and then to the board based on some criteria that we track and measure throughout the year. Customer service scores, surveys, cleanliness as measured by the inspector, dead tickets or lost tickets, which speak to ticket handling and controls at the gate boxes.
Jada, how does the 125 compare to what their current contract?
It is less than.
It's less than this year by a significant amount.
25,000.
The incentive fee is also less or the same?
It's the same. We mentioned, had some content in the RFP that it was a possibility that we would be at some point managing parking enforcement, just because we wanted to make sure that whoever we selected had that capability if that were to happen. So they also added in information about how their fees would change if we took that over. As we think about this process, it's important to remember the separate roles, separating the DDA policy and management decisions versus what the operator has control over and responsibility for on a daily basis. Some of the ideas and questions that came up during the interviews in particular are things that staff will be bringing back to the operations committee for discussion. Both companies are capable of managing the system, but what we have in Republic Parking is a proven ability to do that. They have always been ready and willing and able to work outside of their contract and adapt as downtown has changed, as the parking system has changed, and as we have requested things that weren't part of their initial contract. SB Plus may be willing to do the same, but we don't know that. The Walker assessment helped us to understand that Republic Parking is currently operating at or above industry best practice standards, and we have quite a bit of confidence in their revenue handling and their auditing procedures, which are important parts of the system. And as was mentioned earlier, the ability to provide what's requested in a timely and accurate and professional manner means a lot for making our jobs easier and giving us the tools that we need to keep you informed. As far as technology, the Dixon report, that is the consultants that we hired to kind of take a look at where we are with technology and what next steps could be, helped us to understand where we should be headed. Both companies presented software and hardware technologies that would be at an additional cost to the DDA. And while the SB Plus presentation was pretty heavy on technology, most of the things that they mentioned are similar to things that Republic Parking already has in place. So staff and the operations committee have weighed all the sources of information, and we find that there is no demonstrable benefit to switching operators. We have confidence and are satisfied with what Republic Parking is currently doing for us. Nothing in what we saw or heard throughout the process rose to the level of being a reason to switch. So staff recommended to the committee, and then the committee is now recommending to the board to select Republic Parking.
So the bottom line number difference between what we have today, what a new contract with Republic would be versus if we had gone with the other one. What's the net at the bottom?
So if we chose Republic now, we would be paying less than we are now because their base fee is less.
So it's just by the base fee amount, that's the only difference, right?
Yeah, most of the other costs in the system are things that we manage and reimburse for. So.
And the credit card.
And the credit card fees.
So there was no indication that SP Plus could reduce those costs through their operation?
We didn't go back and negotiate with either of them. We just, in order to be fair, we put the question out there and then compared the information that they gave back to us.
Cool.
So in your opinion, so this is the opportunity having a new contract, so we've had a lot of experience with Republic. But clearly, there's always some things that you wish you could improve, so you kind of wait for that next shot at quoting to say, I'm going to get better this, this, and this, because we know we need it. So in your words, are this, and this that now we have improved based on these discussions that we'll get now that we didn't have before?
So I think some of the things that maybe we've been getting but will be solidified are new things to the contract. There's a section about technology and data, both with technology collection and security. That wasn't in the contract before. We were getting those things, but now it really solidifies what they need to have for us as far as IT staff capable and in town. Some other things that we pulled into the contract that we were getting, but again, weren't necessarily spelled out in the previous contract, came from our Walker assessment. Just language so that we have very specific things that we're getting back from them. Also, as part of the new contract, they will be creating a policy manual for us. They'll be doing a system assessment and meeting with us, and I think that would be the time when those kind of things would come up.
Any other questions?
You may be back up.
Jada, I just want to compliment you on a wonderful process. I think you did a great job.
All right, there is a resolution in your board packet on page 22. Also in your board packet is a copy of the draft contract. I would like to move the resolution to select the public parking system as manager of the EHPD's parking system.
Support. Keith?
I guess I'll start out. As you've seen, I think the process was quite laborious. I think that staff did an excellent job of wading through it. There's been a lot of work with Walker to improve the past contract. As a matter of process, is the contract going to come back in its finalized form to the operations committee, or is that not part of the?
My understanding is that the resolution allows the board chairs to
correct.
finalize it.
I didn't know if the committee was going to, or if we feel that the committee should have. I'm just going to throw that out there. If people would like the committee to review the contract at the next monthly meeting, then we may be able to do that. If there are deep questions about the contract, and I don't know how much of a chance everybody's had to review it.
I sat in on both, I sat in on the interview process, and I think this is the right decision, just in the fact that there really was not much difference between the two. And actually, it was pretty glaring that there's some big technology deficiencies and data deficiencies that hopefully it looks like we're a couple years out from both of the companies. So, I was really hoping that a new operator would be like, this is ready to go with all this data we'd be able to provide, and that was definitely not the case. So that was a pretty big disappointment. But yeah, I think that's pretty big. And then of course, coming in with a lower fee plus just the understanding of our system and our peace of mind that things will continue. I think there was no glaring, wow, that's an amazing thing that we need to have. So I think that really was what it came down to for me. Howard.
So I provided some input to the contract, mostly to change some of the language about direct costs to reasonable and allowable direct costs. And then the other question I had that Susan answered was about how the incentive fee is awarded, and my questions were adequately addressed.
Great. Does anyone have any desire for the full contract to come back to the board versus operations? What is the worded committee co-chairs plus executive director? I do not. Okay. Anyone else that wants to talk about it?
Yes, just one quick comment. One thing that I think is notable between the two firms is the fact that SP Plus is a very large firm, and Ann Arbor would probably be a relatively minor contract in their portfolio, whereas my sense of it is that Republic kind of views us as being, sort of a gem in their portfolio, and that, some of the new ideas, new things that are being done, we push them for, they develop, and they probably use as good examples for other communities. And so I think Republic treats us well, partially for their own self-benefit, that, they can stay ahead of the curve. I'm not sure that from a qualitative point of view, we necessarily get the same treatment from a very large firm. And I think that's an important thing in the long run. And also the other thing I just want to point out was that concept of essentially renegotiating every year. That piece to me would be problematic. So those are two significant, and I agree with Rishi that, if somebody had come along with some wow aspect, especially about technology that could be really transformative for the system, I think that would be worth paying attention to. It sort of speaks to Ed's point about, how to track data. And it's something we have been very cognizant about. We've been asking these questions a lot of folks along the way. So I think those are really the significant factors from my perspective.
And one thing that I learned, but some staff may already known, is that Republic Parking is now part of a much larger corporation, much larger. I think much bigger than SP Plus, right? Is N-Park bigger than SP Plus?
They're about the same.
Okay, so anyway, now Republic is part of a larger corporation, so something to keep in mind for us is if Republic changes over the course of the next couple of years, because they have a different person to answer to.
Yeah.
So.
But we were given assurances that they're being given a lot of autonomy. So.
Yeah.
So I have two questions, Jada. I don't know if you have to come up, but
You're definitely going to have to come up.
so if after the end of this do we have to have cause if we decide we don't want to go forward with them? Is it with cause, or just, no, we don't feel like doing it, we're going to go a different direction? So there's no ties to us making that change. And
Yeah, it would automatically renew. So there's, I think, a 90-day window built in that if next year we wanted to make a change, we would have to take action and trigger that. Otherwise, it would automatically renew for 4 additional years.
And they can terminate if they want within that 5 years for any reason?
In the contract, this is one of the exceptions. They did not, the contract as it is written does not allow that.
Okay.
Certainly, I don't think they would just walk away from it, but I think they also would give us notice if they were unhappy. But they've never given any indication that would be the case.
So I'd like to keep pressure on them also to figure out the data, to figure out how to get us the data. I don't want them to be kind of relaxed about that issue, because this is such a complex beast to try to manage for the city. It certainly gets a lot of attention, and we can make better decisions with better data. So I think we should really hold them to the fire to develop ways to gather the data in forms that we needed to make these decisions.
And just to reinforce that, I think the Operations Committee is going to be talking a lot about data gathering and figuring out that piece of what we're doing. It's going to be a constant focus over the next several years, I'm sure, and it will be emphasized.
Any other thoughts? All right, close up discussion. All those in favor of the resolution to select Republic Parking System as manager of the DDA's parking system, say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Resolution passes.
It's to Keith.
All right. So let's see. We've heard a lot about parking, not just now about who our parking manager is, but obviously it's a big conversation in the community right now, and a big conversation amongst ourselves. And there's been a lot of references during that time to our 2016 Nelson Nelson Nygaard Transportation and Parking Management Study and Report. And sometimes the references to it don't look at it in its complete picture, or so we figured both for ourselves and for the community it would be a good time to revisit it, especially about how parking fits into our larger goal of improving downtown. As we know, over the past 15 years, downtown has changed a lot of growth. Residential populations doubled. Private development has added more than 3 million square feet. And the commercial vacancy rate's at an incredibly low 2%. I believe that's the lowest recorded. During the same time, the parking system has only expanded by 15%. Downtown's become more walkable, active, and transit friendly. So with all of those things happening, we figured it was time to do a revisit of this, since we've been spending a lot of time on it. So I'd like to ask Tom Brown, who was one of the consultants in the Nelson Nygaard 2016 TDM report, to help fill us in on exactly what TDM is, not only what some of those numbers are, but what some of those numbers mean.
Say, before Tom starts,
Yeah.
could you clarify what Nelson Nygaard does? You know, so if people are watching this, they understand what the firm is and where.
Are you Nelson or are you Nygaard?
No, I mean, just to help put
Tom
it in
Nelson or
perspective.
Tom Nygaard?
Put it in perspective. Who are these guys?
Well, I could say it. I bet Tom could say it better.
All right.
So maybe I'm going to toss it over to Tom to first fill us in a little bit on who Nelson Nygaard is and why we would have selected you to do this study. Throw you on the spot.
Yeah, so I would say the most important reason to hire us for a parking study, I would think, compared to most of the firms that compete for parking studies, is we're a full menu transportation planning firm. That's our focus. We actually started as a transit planning firm in San Francisco. So we don't build anything, we don't design anything. So our focus is primarily on management. I would say most of our studies, part of what we're asked to do is project future needs, which is kind of typical for a parking study. But I would say most of the clients that hire us are looking to manage first and then see where their needs are and to continue to manage. So we're very focused on policy, very focused on proactive strategies for making the most of existing parking resources. Even if you don't have a multimodal environment and you're in the suburbs, making the most of your assets always seems like a conservative place to start. The more mobility options you have, the less fixed any kind of measure of parking need is. There are too many movable parts going into the future that if you tweak any one of them, your demand is going to change, and that's kind of what we focus on. So a place like Ann Arbor is one of my favorite places to work. I grew up an hour south of here. But you have so many tools, and it's an expanding menu of mobility options. So lots of parts to play with, lots of options. But at the end of the day, what we provide is a plan based on our assessment, and we hand it over to the DDA or the city, whoever it is, and it really is up to local priorities and values to take that advice and do what they will with it. So.
Okay, thank you.
So we are going to start with a quick overview of TDM. So this is not a summary of the outcomes from the study. What Amber and Susan and Jada asked me to do is kind of focus on some of the points that they feel need some clarifying at this point, about a little over a year after we wrapped up the study. And everybody always wants to know what TDM is, travel demand management or transportation demand management. But like I was saying, it's basically strategies to increase travel efficiency by facilitating shifts away from one person in one car Each trip is one person, one car, and shifts away from peak demand locations or times. So obviously, typical downtown weekday midday is the peak of the peak in a typical month, typical time of year. But invariably, and this is where we often start with downtown parking management studies, is you're always going to get complaints about there's nowhere to park, there's nowhere to park, there's nowhere to park, and the reality of the situation varies widely. You're in a sort of a rarefied company where you actually hit times where you are essentially out of parking. Most places we go to, there's actually plenty of parking around, and that gets down to managing the peak demand locations. Everybody's kind of jamming into the core and complaining that there's nowhere to park because they don't know what their options really are, or the options aren't seen as viable. So some of the primary strategies include improving transit options, expanding those options, improving non-mobility, walk, bike networks and connectivity, and incentives. Things like the Go Pass, which was actually in place well before we arrived for the first parking study we did in 2007. Is a policy seeking to equalize the cost of driving versus taking transit to work. In many places, it's actually more expensive to take the bus to work than drive. If you can adjust that balance, that cost-benefit balance, you can get more people on the bus and less people in your garages if that's what you're seeking to do. And land uses that promote access by proximity. One of the biggest differences between the 2007 and the 2015 studies that we noticed was the real increase in residential activity, residential units, residential population here, which creates a lot of walk-to-work opportunities and walk to everything, sort of a complete neighborhood opportunity. And some of the benefits of focusing on TDM: parking system efficiency. I know we were talking to some stakeholders during the study. Whether you build a garage or you don't, or whether you build two garages, you'll get more value out of what you have today and tomorrow if you're also investing in TDM. Appeal of non-driving options, as Susan was saying earlier, those premiums people are seeing for walkable urban environments are continuing to grow, and they're continuing to be relevant in more and more places. So there are a lot of co-benefits to a lot of the investments that fall under the umbrella of TDM. It's a more walkable area, I can ride my bike and feel safe, this is a place I want to be, this is a place I want to work. And sustainable growth opportunities. So, one of the objectives of the 2007 study was attracting that residential growth, which was a real success for Ann Arbor as part of a sustainable regional growth strategy. So in the end, I think Ann Arbor is actually a remarkable success story. You've gotten a lot more growth based on a lot less parking compared to a typical city based on your investments in TDM. So building upon that success, the DDA, the city, were early adopters of a lot of this stuff. We came with new ideas in 2007, but Ann Arbor was already sort of a model of seeing the wisdom of these investments, transit investments that go past, which I mentioned, and also just seeing the relevance of in better walk, bike infrastructure in terms of bringing more people to downtown, but also in fewer cars. So seeing that as a relevant component of your investment options when you do have supply constraints. Coming out of the 2007 study, some of the high-level recommendations that were all put into place: price-based demand management. So getting back to that idea, if everyone's jamming into the center, we probably should be charging more for parking in this area, charging less for parking here. Plenty of cities I work in, they have one price for off-street parking permit, a monthly permit. Here, you're moving in a direction where you're recognizing that more people want to be in certain areas of the city, and you're pricing based on that to redistribute the demand. The two express bus services came out of that study, talking to commuters about what would improve their commute in a way that would get them to adopt transit and sort of get off. I think a lot of them were on a wait list for parking at the time. And shared parking expansion. So the two parking facilities that were built between the two studies were built along the model that we talked about, partnering with private development, the idea of having not a standalone structure, but some kind of joint development with mixed uses. Some of the outcomes that that we were asked to talk about from the 2015 study, capacity concerns. So from what I've been told, the library lane facility in particular, when that went in, there was a lot of relief in terms of we can offer monthly parking permits. It may not be right next to someone's job, but we can at least offer the permits. What we heard in reaching out to employers and employees here was we love being downtown, even more than the 2007 study. We want to be downtown. We don't want to leave downtown, but we need to be able to offer parking to our employees. We can't get the employees that we want, or we can't keep them if that isn't one of the commute options, and right now we just can't get a permit. And this is a map of the weekday, midday, like I said, typical peak of the peak period, and all that red is basically facilities that are at capacity. Yellow is near capacity. So your off-street system, as well as a lot of your on-street parking, is at capacity. This is a picture that would tell me the story before I would know about it. There are probably wait lists for monthly permits in these facilities. This is Friday evening. Everything's a little bit flipped. On street is just jammed full, and it doesn't look that dissimilar on Monday evening. During the evenings, your on street is very much in demand. A lot of capacity off street. So this starts to get into the more typical downtown. Invariably, I'm sure people are complaining there's nowhere to park downtown on a Friday night. There actually is. So there is the opportunity to provide some relief on a Friday night, as long as you're willing to park off-street. And then a quick snapshot of overnight to get a sense of what the impact of residential permits is having on the system. This is the one time during the week where you have significant excess capacity. Blue is basically under 60% full. Part of the study that we were asked to discuss is the projection for future need. So what we looked at was, what are the projections for commercial growth? What are the projections for residential population growth? And how does that translate into parking demand, or how might it translate into parking demand going forward if things essentially stay as they are today, going out to 2015, which was at the time for 4 to 5 years ahead. What we projected was potential for 400 and the need for 400 new parking spaces to meet residential parking demand, and 451 spaces to meet increased commercial activity. And if those overlap 100%, which would be unusual, because most resident vehicles, a good portion of them would leave during the day when the commercial demand is at peak. If they overlapped 100%, that's where we got the 860 potential supply deficit going forward. This is just a table showing the addition of that, and basically this is the ratio today. You have about 5,500 residents, and that map that I showed, we had hard numbers for that map, a total of just over 1,000 cars parked in the DDA system overnight. Projecting that going forward, the increased population is how we got that number. It took a similar process for projecting the increased commercial parking demand. Sorry, the slide's redundant. Looking forward, though, we also look to, again, the opportunities to increase transit use, increase bike commuting. Walk commute we didn't really particularly look at, because in general, it's great to bring in more residents, but right now they're bringing a car, so even if they're living and working downtown, they're probably bringing a car, so the opportunity to reduce that 860 by more residents, we think kind of balanced out. So we looked to opportunities to shift modes toward transit and bike primarily to try to address that potential supply gap.
So if we did those two things, what you're saying is that we get excess capacity?
You could, yeah. All of this stuff, like I said, in an urban environment, there's so many moving pieces, but our conclusion conservatively is we think that, and we set what I would describe a mode shift increase for transit as ambitious but reasonable based on the ATA was in the process of expanding service. So we looked at how many service hours they had in 2015, how many they're projected to have in 2019, and if ridership trends carried forward. We were also asked smartly by Susan at the time, gas prices were really going down, so we factored in if gas prices continued to go down. So the potential for parking relief of almost 1,000 spaces by 2019 with those transit improvements, if that carried forward to an increased transit mode share.
So it's interesting that 860 is what sticks. That's what people see. They see, oh my gosh,
Right.
I don't have enough parking. I almost feel like it should never be said that way. It should say, if you don't change anything else, which is highly unlikely, almost impossible,
Right.
then this would be it.
Yeah, yeah.
I know we're not going into like details of the study, but just a quick question. On the previous slides where we showed percentages, what day or what time frame of the year were those?
The maps?
The maps, yes.
Uh-huh.
What time frame of the year were these snapshots done?
That was in the spring or the fall? It was
Yeah,
fall.
I think we started in the spring and it
Fall 2015.
through October.
During the school year.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
this is averages of that time, that 6-month time frame, but it's not taking into account winter, like snow, bad weather. Like the percentages don't include overlap over winter months.
We did look at so we had to do manual counts for on-street, but we did do a sweep over the year, including winter, spring and fall, for the data that we could get from the off-street facilities with the gates and the loops.
Yeah.
And so we did try to show the peak of the peak.
Okay.
You know, if it drastically changed in January, we would have used those maps. So.
I was just curious.
But yeah, we do try to find normative conditions, so versus maybe the week before Christmas or anything.
The reason I thought of that in the slide that Marie was just talking about, 238 bike, you know, that's got to be seasonal, right? So like now you're talking, because I mean, you're not going to get that mode shift consistently year round, right?
Right.
So that seasonality of those 238 spaces is, academically,
Yeah.
you're going to get that at a time. Are you getting that at a time where you need it, or I don't know, or is it more driving or less driving winter? You know what I'm saying? I'm just, I'm curious.
Absolutely. And I think the bike mode share is tricky on a few levels, but it's based on Get Downtown surveys, the most recent at the time. The estimated mode share based on, I think they were asked, what is your primary mode of commute?
Yeah.
So arguably a lot of, and I think it was like 7%, arguably a lot of those that said bike was their primary commute, maybe in January it's not.
Yeah.
But what we are seeing is in more and more places when it is limited to, I don't bike in January, they're taking the bus in January, they're not driving.
Right.
And one of the TDM recommendations we recommended was adding some strategies to make it more likely that they'd be using the bus when they're not biking.
There's also that same, so if like a bicyclist will take the bus in bad weather.
Yeah.
There's probably a bus rider who doesn't want to wait outside when it's bad weather and actually shifts up to car. So that part I think is the seasonality of these spaces. To your point, right, is like it's not 1,000 spaces year round. I think it's 500 to 1,000. There's some fluctuation.
Right. So mostly we put these, the 860 number and these numbers are really out there to show the range of options. It could, if you do nothing and things go forward, you could need as much as 860 spaces. If you really want to invest in getting these mode shares up, it could reach these levels where you're actually at an excess capacity.
Yeah.
And I will say the rainy day, the January thing, January is different for a whole month, but one of the things that was quite evident when we met with commuters was the rainy day option, which a lot of times would be driving. Uber and Lyft, a lot of people were getting rid of their car because when it does rain, or maybe in January, they just do something else.
You had a couple slides back, you talked about increased number of residents. Do you make any distinction between student and non-student? Because obviously their behavior is significantly different when it comes to decisions.
Right, right. This was based on, I think, your state of the downtown, I think, which, can you answer if that's more
This was
focused
based
on?
on what current residents are doing, which is a mix of students and non-students. So projecting forward, I think we thought that it balanced out.
Well, what's interesting, because you mentioned the 2007, 2015, obviously there's a significant increase in residents.
Yeah.
And the lion's share of that is obviously student.
Right,
So
right.
we've had a disproportionate growth in that segment, at least in the downtown. I'm not saying universities realm.
Yeah.
People that are living downtown in high rises. In that 2 study periods,
Yeah.
disproportionate size of that is students, which obviously behave differently. They're not most likely
Right.
own a car.
Like the off-peak slide, if you go back to the 2:30 in the morning slide.
Yeah.
Overnight. So 1,000 cars were counted being parked overnight, and at the point this was taken, there were 5,500 residents. So to that point, if they were parking, they weren't in the public system. That to your point, whether they're students or not, if there's 5,500 people living in this area and only 1,000 cars, some of which, 4th of William are air ride cars and so on. It was just an interesting observation. Downtown residents aren't bringing cars universally the way you might in a suburban area.
Right.
That was an interesting finding.
Yeah, so that didn't factor into our mode shift opportunities. It was more of how many more cars would we expect from residents. So, like I said, it's kind of a wash. It's great because they're walking to their job or they're walking to their classes, but if they are using the DDA facility, their car's kind of there all day. So it doesn't help relieve the parking demand.
It's a good point, though. I think, I don't know what the answer is, but I think to your point, it's like if you can split out students from non-students. I think the assumption would be that students would have the average car per resident for a student would be much less. If you can split that out, and you can just get a better understanding of, rather than 1,000 to 5,000, maybe it's 200 to whatever, and 800 to 800. There's just that difference. We may never be able to figure it out, but if we could, I think it would shed a lot of light into.
Well, this map
And
right here.
there's lots of other information too along those lines.
Yeah,
that
lots
we
of
don't know.
Right.
If there are more students in the high rise, does it mean that the student housing is now being used more for non-student?
Right.
The former student housing
Sure.
is now, and anecdotally, we know that some of that's happening.
Yeah.
How much?
Yeah, how much? Right. Anecdotally, we know we probably
Right.
would all be like, yeah, I know this is happening. We just don't know enough to be 80 to 90%, or we can't put numbers on it.
My guess would be that in terms of the overnight, the residents using the system overnight, the higher the cost of the living space, the more likely they are to be storing a car. I mean, I would think that those 2 things would follow.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, you look at this map, the new apartment complex at First and Washington is the highest utilization overnight. Well, that's what I would call non-student housing for the most part. And
Yeah.
there you go.
Yeah.
That's under contract, and that's one of those interesting policy questions. The garage is 250, and we gave 146, so they're using 146 of them overnight, so that's exactly what you're seeing. Where they're not contracted, we're not seeing that kind of density. The Zaragons, for instance, you're not putting that kind of pressure on Forest or Maynard or
Yeah, I would say, one of the risks potentially when you do set aside permits to a residential building is they may pass that on as a free benefit, which is more likely that you'll get 146 cars, whereas if that's an optional added expense, you'll see more residents leaving their car at home or selling their car.
Or the other way, the other side of that coin is people that are going to opt in to live there are going to require parking space. And this back from point about student versus non-student. A non-student's most likely going to be more likely to be okay with an apartment that doesn't have a guaranteed parking space, where on average a non-student is going to be less likely to accept that same situation.
Right, yeah.
And just to move us forward, back to, where was it, the 9 900 and so on. There we go.
Yeah.
And is that based on current projected transit service expansions, or if certain things were done, you could reduce it by that amount?
So this was based just on the service expansions, and what we actually
That are
looked at.
already in place or
Yeah.
projected?
So what we looked at was, I think, historic trends of riders per service hour and how that tracked over time, and then looked at what the service hour projections were for the increased services that they were looking at, and we kind of split the difference. So it wasn't the most ambitious projection possible, because that was actually pretty high, and I know every Midwestern state I know transit money can come and go, and things get tight all of a sudden. And also, like I said, we also factored in the fact that gas prices were really dipping at the time, so which has been affecting transit ridership.
Tom, I'm going to go drag us back to the 860 for a moment.
Okay.
So if I understand the methodology, it was based on looking at the past X number of years. How many years up till 2015? 5 years? Or?
What was based?
The basis of projected growth was based on past growth.
I think for the commercial it was, yes. Like the simplest one was the residential growth. The growth projection numbers we got. We didn't project how many new residents you would get or how much new commercial activity you might get. Those were taken from the state of the downtown reports, which do those projections, which is why we hit on the 2019 year.
Where I'm coming from is, we've had a spurt of residential growth downtown, obviously.
Yeah.
A big question in town is, will that continue, and will it continue at the rate it has been over the last 5, 6, 7 years?
Right.
The thing that to me is actually almost more interesting is the commercial growth, because that's obviously projected to be more numbers than the residential. And
partly because they more consistently will rely on the DDA system.
Okay.
So clearly the 1 in 5 number, some of that is, some developers do provide parking. So if, like I know there was a townhouse development down Main Street. So they had one space per unit, or I know some don't provide any parking, but some do. So that's part of it. Whereas most commuters, if they drive and park, are using the DDA system. So that's part of why the number's higher for commercial.
So I'm not sure who to ask, though, but the commercial growth piece is the thing I'm curious about, because there's been very little office building expansion because of the cost of construction and market rates.
Yeah.
So where do we come up with that commercial growth projection? I'm not quite sure where that's coming from. What commercial growth? If it's
define commercial, maybe it's more than just office.
Yeah, but I guess I'm trying. What does it?
Well,
I'm not sure.
What is commercial?
There hasn't been much change, and I haven't heard anything that's projecting that.
Like I said, the projection in commercial activity, commercial tenants, was taken from the state of the downtown report. But I will say one of the things that we're seeing consistently with downtowns, which is affecting parking demand, is you're getting more commuters in less space than 10 years ago. Everybody's working
firms using
tech firms, open office space. So that may be one factor. Is, no new office space, you're getting more people in it.
So we can let Tom keep moving. One thing I think that we're all kind of like falling back on, which we should probably keep as a point for the retreat, is that a lot of this is predicated on our understanding of growth, commercial growth, residential growth, which is a lot, I guess, is coming from the state of downtown report. So whereas I kind of just look at that report for its nice pretty graphs, we might actually need to go in and look more at the numbers on that.
So just to clarify where the numbers are coming from, they actually came from the forward planning and market analysis.
Okay.
So it's not just what we track, it's the economic firm that we hire. It's the economic firm that we hire to look to the future.
Right. Okay. So I'm just saying, like, we kind of like always think, oh, we'll look at this report, but there's actually a different report that we probably need to understand better. Like, I didn't even know that
Yeah.
I didn't realize that report
We
existed.
take the data from that report and put it into the state of the downtown
Yeah.
report, but they look at the details of growth and help
Okay.
us predict to the future. And Tom was correct. We haven't seen a lot of commercial development, but we've seen many more employees fit into the existing spaces.
Yeah, I think the office vacancy is 2%
Right,
downtown
right,
now, so
yeah.
something's gonna give eventually.
Yep.
It's pure
They're going to
economics.
stack desks on top of each other.
We thought about that at one point. Yeah. We thought about that at one point in our New York office, actually. The pictures were not pretty. Okay. So I'll move forward. So again, this gets to how we tried to couch this. Projected demand, projected need is always a number that people want, but we tried to couch this as this is not a target to seek for its own sake. It's again, this is as bad as it could be if things continue exactly as they are, and you have a complete overlap of the resident and commuter demand. But you have options to invest in mobility and TDM as you have been historically, and what that does is provide you with an opportunity to find right-sized opportunities, right-fit opportunities for supply expansion. So if you're chasing a number, then you're much more likely to build something that you'll not be happy with 5 years after. But if you find the right opportunity, a joint development, something that helps bring, so for example, when we did meet with developers, we heard from a lot of people and stakeholders that office office opportunities is a missing piece to the downtown puzzle. So if, for example, that could be a component of a right opportunity, if partnering with a developer would bring in that office space that's needed, that would be a reason to move forward. But not be led by the 860 space deficit number. One of the other opportunities, one of the recommendations was, again, Ann Arbor was an early innovator in terms of how they manage parking, but more and more places are doing the same. More and more places, whether they're managing parking as well as Ann Arbor or not, they see the money behind walkable urban development, and it's not just empty nesters moving downtown. It's employers. It's people of all ages. It's really in high demand. Walk Score came out like maybe 10 years ago. If every time I go to use it, I forget. It's basically a real estate site now. It's become such a valuable tool.
What was that site?
Walkscore.com. It used to be a very wonky, plannerish kind of metric of how walkable is your neighborhood, but now the whole thing is taken up with they assume people are looking for apartments or office space. It's pretty amazing. So competition is growing, so you want to stay innovative. Mobility options are expanding. Mobility as a service is something everyone in our industry is talking about, which is really creating a lot of uncertainty. So again, this is not the right time to get too far ahead of the curve in terms of adding supply. But you do have a system where I think you have less risk getting a little bit ahead of the demand if the right opportunity is there. But you don't want to get too far ahead because really some of the projections for parking demand are pretty outlandish. No one really knows what's going to happen, but demand seems to be, everyone's saying it's going to go down at some point, at some time. So some of our specific TDM recommendations, you're out of capacity, you don't have a short-term opportunity to increase capacity, so raise rates and look to opportunities to provide discounts for people that are trying to reduce their parking demand. There are Go-Pass participants, they're investing in other TDM amenities such as bike parking or participation in Get Downtown activity. So that essentially if you're doing what you can that sort of fits with where the parking system wants to be, maybe you don't see a permit rate increase. Continue to invest in transit, bike, and walk options. Add Go-Pass amenities. So one of the things we talked about, which is part of the technology issue that, it's easy enough for me to say, but one of the best practices for these things is, hey, if you're a Go-Pass participant, you get like a handful of daily parking permits for that rainy day, or that day you need to pick up your kid early. so that I'm not getting a monthly permit to cover those days. I have those free passes, and normally I'm riding the bus, because what happens is once you have that monthly permit in your hand, you're much more likely to drive. And explore downtown shuttle circulator options. So what we did hear from a lot of those employers and employees that said we just need a parking option. I'll park at 4th and William, but when it's January, it's a terrible walk. Could we have a circulator? Create a move downtown program. So the Get Downtown program has been very successful. It's TDM for people commuting to downtown. You have a new residential population that's continuing to expand, so providing options. So, hey, maybe I brought a car with me, but now I realize I don't need it because there's bike share. I joined Zipcar and there's a bus to the airport. Or maybe I brought 2 cars and now I sell one of them. Residential Go Pass program is something that's catching on, including Boulder, which was sort of the model for the Ann Arbor program. They're reaching out into neighborhoods so that residents have an unlimited free bus pass program as well. And we talked, focus on the farmers market, but we developed a toolkit for events to reduce parking demand during those one-off or regular events. So supply strategies, we recommended to focus on shared parking efficiencies, facilitate new development, again, an opportunity to bring in a new type of land use that would enhance the downtown, attract desired land uses, and continue to attract growth into downtown. I think avoiding regional sprawl continues to be a priority, something that downtown Ann Arbor is really helping the region with. And again, we really think joint development is the ultimate way to move forward, like we did in 2007. More and more best practices. It's still a new practice in a lot of areas. You've kind of dipped your toe in and had some mixed experiences. Other cities are moving forward with this, but it's the best way to ensure you don't build standalone facilities. You gain direct control over where the driveways are and how the facility functions with the walkable surroundings. Share costs, reduce risks, and again, give you some control over what kind of land uses you're facilitating. These are some of the things that, again, the conversation gets driven by these things. We need parking because there's this 860 number out there, or we're getting rid of this 100 space lot, so we need 100 new spaces somewhere else. Perceived supply constraints. So again, people are probably complaining that there's nowhere to park on Friday and Saturday nights, but there are. And specific project needs. This is a mixed-use shared parking environment. Every new project will blend into the system, and it's hard to project what any individual project will absolutely need in that kind of environment because there's so many options. And really, TDM and mobility is your best foot forward. Conversely, part of our messaging that we want to clarify in that recommendation for the projections is it's never too early to start seeking those right fit opportunities. Again, you're at a lower risk for getting ahead of the supply-demand mix, but you don't want to get too far ahead. So it's really based on opportunity. We did recommend some supply expansion opportunities, including nights and weekends for Huron Street, which I think would actually make that a much easier street to cross and walk along. Public valet, something we talked about, more and more cities are using. Basically, you're turning over some curbside spaces and using some of that off-street capacity that is there on evenings and weekends. And the Ann and Ashley project was something that was sort of really being worked through at the time, and that certainly fits the category of a right fit opportunity if everything aligns well in terms of actually paying for it. We worked with Amber and the city planning department about some zoning strategies. And again, there were other evolving joint development opportunities at the time. Nothing was too firm to point to a specific project, but all of them kind of fit the basic model of what we think is a good fit for downtown. So 2 messages that I did want to put up here last. So pricing, just like pricing, we always tell our clients, easier for me to say than for people actually responsible to actually do, but pricing should never be about revenue. It's about managing resources. In the same way, supply expansion, if you can afford it, should never be about need. It should be about opportunity. Hopefully you get ahead of that point where you avoid absolutely having to do something that you may not like 5 years later. Sorry, that went a little long, but we've discussed already. Any other questions? I'm happy to hang around.
Thanks, Tom. Okay, back to Keith or John.
Well, the only other thing on my list here is down a little further, so I'm going to jump ahead to that circulator feasibility study status, which is phase 1 is underway. Not a lot of action to report because right now it's a lot of in the data gathering stage, and this is gathering information about the link ridership and operation. As well as some of the things we heard about here about the opportunities for what a circulator would be able to do to help manage parking as well. Did you want to cover any of the other ones, John? Or
I think I have the rest of it.
okay.
Monthly parking report is in your packet, pages 43 to 45. Any questions? Now's your chance.
Going to John.
Seeing none, the 4th and William project status, we now have 2 operating elevators as of Friday. And the only other thing left to do is the punch list. There are a lot of little detailing things that need to be completed on the project. Some of them are waiting for warmer weather, and the punch list items should all be done in May. And finally, e-park installations are 85% complete. And we expect to have the rest of them completed by the end of this month. And Rishi, you'll be happy to know that our new ePark app will launch sometime in May.
I'm loving the new e-parks, man. They're up north in Maine. That's awesome. They're all over the place now. It's so good.
An interesting anecdote is how, when they first went in, everyone was complaining about, oh, I don't know how these work. These are so confusing. Where I am, where we're only getting them now and have it for a long time, and over the last year, the bigger complaint I've been getting is, why can't we have those e-park machines here? So certainly attitudes have changed a lot.
So that the new app is moving forward.
The new app is moving forward. If you'd like more details, I think you need to ask somebody else.
Joe, you and I can have a good, nice conversation. All right. Since I'm the only one that's going to use this app anyway, so you might as well just directly use your one consumer.
The only one around this table. Our next Ops Committee meeting is Wednesday, April 26th at 11 a.m.
Thank you, John. Moving on to Finance Committee and Maureen.
So we did our usual really fun going through the monthly expense registers. Probably the most important thing we talked about was setting up this retreat to have a discussion about parking. So we'll be getting prepared for that. A doodle poll went out, so we're trying to figure out what day in June we're going to have that discussion. We made a presentation at the March 13th City Council budget work session about the DDA's fiscal 18 and 19 budgets, answered questions. It's anticipated that the City Council will vote to approve its budgets at the May 15th council meeting. The next Finance Committee meeting will be Tuesday, April 25th at 1 p.m.
Next up, thanks Maureen. Next up, Capital Improvements Committee. John.
Thank you. Susan gave you an update on South University. Obviously, if anybody has any questions about that, or if people as we start construction on it, have questions, make sure to point them towards the office here to resolve any concerns they have. Fifth in Detroit, we had a presentation at our last meeting by Smith Group JJR looking at some options for pedestrian spaces associated with farmers market as a main focus, and they had, I think, 3 or 4 different options they showed us, asking for feedback. I think people gave some very helpful feedback to them about things to look at and for those plaza type spaces and so forth. Also, a fair amount of conversation about pedestrian safety, how pedestrian crossings would work, the medians, work with Community High in particular. how drop-offs might work. So that work has continued on. At the same time, there's been a lot of outreach with stakeholders by the design team, Community High School, Old Fourth Wards, Citizens Advisory, Historic District Commission, Farmers Market staff, and AAPS Transportation Safety Committee. So I think folks are having a lot of opportunity to give their feedback now. So it has reached that point where now they are looking at really starting to refine the details for landscaping, utilities, overhead communication lines, all those sorts of things. And along those lines, I believe Liz has reached out to, it's probably AT&T, looking at what the potential projected cost would be to bury the private utility lines. We're not talking about the service lines from DT, they're way high up. I meant that sort of the communication lines. So I think things seem to be moving along well, and no major hurdles. Huron Street, they've been looking at analyzing traffic data. So a lot of that is looking at what off-peak parking looks like, whether there's any opportunity for lane reductions, different times of the week, those sorts of things. So my hope is that at our next meeting, we'll have an opportunity to get some feedback from them of kind of where they're going with the data they've been analyzing. That will help us understand better how we can make use of that right-of-way space, I think is sort of the bottom line of what that information will start to mean to us. And then the other piece that we talked about at the last meeting were the next raft of projects potentially coming along. The street improvement projects that folks participated in at our last retreat. Staff had put together good information on costs and what potential scheduling options there might be. So there was a lot of conversation about that, and I think we asked for some more information by staff at the next meeting to sort of help refine where we're going with that. Keeping in mind that one piece, Tom Crawford was at the meeting too, which was interesting because it's helpful to have him there, because if any projects start looking at involving bonds and so forth, his input is invaluable. So I think that's wraps it up. Is there anything that anybody has questions about, or anybody who was at the meeting wants to share? Our next meeting is, I believe, April 19th at 11 a.m. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Next up is Partnerships and Economic Development Committee. Joan or Al are not here, but I have my eyes and ears everywhere as chair, so I will report out on it. It was a partners meeting, and City Council was there. The city's in budget season with early work sessions. The budget will be presented April 17th in anticipation of council action at the May 15th council meeting. Howard, that all sound about right?
They will approve the budget on the 15th.
They will, not anticipation, approve the budget on May 15th. And City Council held a special work session on the Library Lane proposal on March 16th. Obviously, that's in the news and lots going on with that, so we all are waiting to see how that all turns out.
And that'll be on the agenda on the 17th of April.
17th of April is when, okay, good to know. City planning, there hadn't been any new downtown projects since the last meeting, since the committee last met. So an update was given on Lower Town development. My eyes and ears did not provide me information on that update, so we'll skip that. Washtenaw County Administrator Greg Dill was there. He reported that the county is moving to a one-year budget rather than the current four-year budget. And he also shared that county commissioners recently held a retreat and there were no major changes in focus. So, the library was there. Wow, this was a pretty packed meeting. The library was there, and the AADL director, Josie Parker, reported about the success of the renovated, expanded Westgate Library, which if you have not seen it, it's pretty awesome, and has great Wi-Fi, in case you're wondering. And she also told us the downtown library continues to be their most active location and is a downtown hub. Said the library lane garage is a huge help with this, so good to know there. And Amber shared the status of DDA projects, including South University and 5th and Detroit improvement projects, so good work, Amber. Next Partnerships Committee meeting, Wednesday, April 12th at 9 a.m. And seems like it's very action-packed. Next up is Executive Committee meeting. We met, as we always do, right before the general board meeting. I was a tad tardy, so I caught the tail end of it. I just believe the agenda was discussed. Marie, was anything discussed?
No, we just went over the agenda.
Okay. Our next committee meeting will be before next board meeting, Wednesday, May 3rd at 11 a.m. Moving on to new business. Does anybody have any new business that they would like to bring up? No? Okay. Do we have anyone else in the audience that would like to participate? Ed, you want to come back up? Yep. Cool. Whenever you're ready.
Hi, I'm still at committee. Let's see, so thanks for taking a look at the data requirements. The Nelson Nygaard study was very interesting, both in terms of how one might visualize the data and also how limited the data is in the absence of electronic records that would match survey information. One of the things that I thought about as I was listening to that was, well, if the parking operator doesn't have fine-grained granular data about the money that's being collected at each space, which I'm sure they do, but they may not have it be readily accessible. There's another unit of government that impacts use of spaces that might be useful as a proxy for demand, and that would be parking enforcement. So the corresponding ask would be, instead of looking at the amount of revenue per space, look at over a long span of time with all the individual details wiped out, look at the number of parking tickets issued at a given space and visualize that on a map and say, where are people overstaying their welcome? Where are people parking in front of a meter that isn't really a meter that they should be parking at because it's a handicap meter and they don't have a handicap spot? Where are they parking in no parking zones? Get a big picture visualization of the whole system to assess where the infractions are occurring, because I know that no one really wants to build a system that generates a lot of parking tickets. It's not the way the system is built. It's not a ticket-driven revenue. It's usage-driven revenue. I did ask the city for something related in a FOIA request. I asked for records over the span of a month for cases where community standards had caused a car to be towed. So that's another proxy for something going wrong. And was told that yes, they could do it, and it would be about 2 hours of someone's work to get the data, and another 2 or 3 hours of work to redact the data to get rid of the stuff that wasn't okay, and that the total sum with all of the reproduction of materials and whatnot was like $250 or $300. And I'm interested, but I'm not $300 interested in that answer. But you guys might be, and you have the resources to ask directly of other units of government to do some work for you. And so I would recommend that, sort of as either as input to a Nelson Nygaard type study or for your own use or whatever, getting some insight, again, into actual usage and actual revenues per space as a rolled up over a year, but at a granular per space level, and then tap into the city records to the extent that they exist in a form that doesn't cost you tens of thousands of dollars of someone's work to get them, to visualize the system in such a way that you can start to make decisions about what should be done. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. Any other participation from the audience? Come on up.
In the interest of time, we'll keep this brief. Just wanted to introduce myself to the board. I am Chris Simmons. I am the new Get Downtown Director, otherwise known as the new Nancy. Had a couple of opportunities to talk with folks in I think it's day 8, Kelly? Yeah, 8 days on the job, but just wanted to make sure you put a face to the new name as we put some pieces out there and let you know that I'm available. Still go to Kelly for all the go passes, please. I'm not there. But looking forward to dealing with some of the redesign projects we've already got on the books that we have asked for money for. High priority on my list, but also very interested in the data conversations and where those go and how we can maybe marry some of my decade of experience in transportation demand management with where the authority is moving next. So, thank you.
Thanks, Chris. I hope you have not coined yourself a new name for good.
I didn't do that one. I'm just holding on to it.
Got it.
He doesn't look like
I'm not calling him that.
I am. For sure I am. All right. Any other audience participation? No? All right. Can I have a motion for adjournment?
So move.
Keith, Bob, we are adjourned. Also awesome about the new library is they have like really big public meeting space that